feature of how you can invite your friends to watch online with you while you're watching the live stream. You can click on this plus button where it will pull up a list of your friends where you can invite them to join you in watching the live stream. You can do the same on your mobile device. So if you go to this share button here, you will be given a list of your friends where you can send them an invite to watch along with you while you're watching the live stream. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and we hope you stay connected with us, and make sure to like our Facebook page so that you can get all of the updates on what's happening here at Family Church. Hi guys, I'm Katie, and we at Family Church wanted to show you guys how to give on our live stream website. At live.ourfamily.church, you will see the option to give online on the right-hand side of your screen. You will be taken to a safe environment where you can see that your connection is secure. There are two options when you go to give. You can give one time or set up a reoccurring gift. So that's it, but we really want to know how we can support you and your family during this time. So please let us know, and we'll continue to be praying for you guys.
Hello, everyone. I'm Troy Schmidt. We're here for another edition of Tell Your Story. We've got two great stories here today. I hope you'll stick around for us the next half hour. Just a few announcements. First of all, as always, make sure you hit the share button, share this. There could be somebody that wants to see this, that needs to see these stories and how Christ has really redeemed and forgiven. We can only do all this because you so faithfully give to us, You can do that online at give.ourfamily.church. Also, for our students, as things are starting to open up here a little bit, we're so happy to be able to say that we're going to be having our tribes. They're going to be every Wednesday, June 24th to July 22nd. Got a lot of fun in store for our students. And then right after that, we're going to have our Camp Anderson. And so we want to make sure that all the students, all the parents know about that, and they're getting themselves ready and prepared for it. Well, I have with us today Stephanie Gavin. And Stephanie is married to Daryl. And they have 3 kids, Jen, and they have Joni, and they have Nick. And you're also a part of BSF,
Yes.
which is important. And sadly, they haven't been able to meet. I guess they've been sort of adapting and doing the Zoom thing, right?
Right.
But of course, your plans are hopefully to get back up and running here in September.
Yes.
And you're the leader. You used to be one of the speaker, but you're not. You're working with the children now. Is that right? Okay.
Yes. I was the substitute teaching leader.
Yeah.
So I used to teach periodically, but now I am the director of our student program.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's
our
great.
homeschool students are invited to join us now. We have classes for them too.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's
it's
great.
awesome.
I don't know why I was showing a picture of you dancing right now, but we'll get to that part.
Yeah, well,
that's how
hey,
much fun they
that's
have.
how much fun I have
they
in
have
life, right?
during this. But so our paths are interesting. We have known each other longer than we thought.
Right.
And it all started with one day I was walking from one building to another, and I saw you, and I went, wait a minute, I know you from somewhere. And then we stopped, we backtracked, and you said you had seen me before and sort of put it all together. And you said, we knew each other at college. And we went, oh no.
You are Troy Schmidt, and we lived across the hall from each other.
Across the hall in college. That is bizarre
Yes.
that we would run into each other here.
And turns out our children knew each other well as also.
Our children knew each other. My son, Carson, took Joni to some dance, right?
I don't know. Yeah, they were very good friends.
Really good
Still
friends.
are, yeah.
And so we've both agreed there will be silence about our times in college.
Yes.
Not proud of that time. And maybe some point you'll interview me about how I came to know Christ. But I do know this. I'll say this about college. We were at UGA. That's when we knew each other. But God was working on me during that time.
Oh, yeah.
And do you remember at the end of the hall there was the Jesus Suite? Were they there when you were there? Because you were there in '82, right?
Right.
Just gave away your age.
Yeah, whoops.
Sorry.
Sorry.
But there was a Jesus Suite, and there were 4 girls who all loved Jesus, and we all sort of nicknamed them the Jesus Suite. And they were just the kindest, most gracious people. It was like the first real Christians I kind of knew.
Oh, okay.
And I just remember that God was saying, just showing me something through them.
Yeah.
And it was just love and acceptance despite, the animal that I was. They still sort of liked me, but it was a really strong faith down there.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand as much where I was from.
Right. Well, I think it was also part of my story is that I wouldn't appreciate the grace of God if I wasn't able to look back and go, wow, were you gracious
Yeah.
and
the
merciful
amount of
through that, right?
forgiveness that God needed to do.
Just all those little times in our lives.
So our paths continue in strange ways. You left UGA and you went to FSU.
Right.
Because you were a gymnast, is that right?
I was, and I stopped competing.
Yeah.
Our coach left Georgia, and with that I said, it's kind of time. So that went the scholarship and everything, and so I moved in-state. And of course I couldn't go to University of Florida coming from Georgia, so there I found myself at FSU, and go Noles.
And then, 3 of my kids went to FSU, and of course you had all 3? No, all 3 went?
2.
2 went
Right.
to FSU. So there at the end, all the paths crossed, and here we are today.
Here we are.
So your journey of faith, I don't know if God was working at UGA, was working on your heart, but he was certainly working on your heart at FSU. Tell me what he was doing.
Oh, well, I moved to FSU, and it was a growing up time. Being an athlete, my life was very controlled by those I was under their leadership, I mean, everything from having weight checks to following all the rules of routines and things like that. So I got to FSU, and I grew up a lot in just the summer of transition and the independence, and now I have all this time on my hands and things. But
because you're not an athlete.
Yeah,
I
wasn't up every morning and every evening running in and out of the gym, and so. But the Lord was working on me to grow up in life in general and manage time on my better and learn how to manage time and how to eat and how to function as a normal person, right? Because I wasn't normal as an athlete.
You're not a normal person.
Right.
But all the faith and everything, did you grow up in that?
I
Was that
did.
introduced
I
to you?
did grow up as a church-going child. My family, my mom especially, was very involved in church and taking me to church. It was, for me though, I didn't fully understand what Christians really were experiencing. I was doing all the right things, I thought, for the most part. Going to church, this and that, and I knew Jesus. I loved God, but didn't know what that really was, and what do you do beyond that? How does that affect me day to day? And then I met Daryl.
Daryl, this handsome man who walks into your life, who you eventually married. So what sort of influence did he have? He probably was a little more invested in his faith,
Absolutely.
Right?
Daryl just was very convicted. He was doing all the right things as a young adult. I knew what the right things were, but I wasn't doing them all. He was. And he had just such a solid commitment to doing what was right. And it was just so beautiful to see somebody who could live in a college, and one of our first dates was to go to church. And I was like, wow, okay, you're a good-looking guy, and I like you, and I like how you live. I like the friends you have. I was definitely drawn to not only him, but who he was. Yeah. And so it developed from there. And one of the next things we did, we went to a Billy Graham crusade together.
Was that in Florida?
It was at Florida State, at the Civic Center. There he was, Billy Graham. And in the middle of that, I looked at Daryl and I said, I need to go down. I know I have more, there's more in this, and so I recommitted my faith that night, and he did as well. I think we were both realizing that there was more. It wasn't just, I think in a sense we were both living a religious life.
Got it.
And now, and I can only speak for me, it was a religion. And now I was recognizing there was more.
You were falling in love with Jesus.
Yeah, and it was a little hard because it's like, whoa, I don't want to be like that weird person, that
the ones that are at the end of the hall.
The hall, right? But I wanted more.
Yeah.
And so that was where our journey began, and God just walked with us and changed some of the things we thought and did, and it was beautiful.
Yeah.
It was really cool to now be doing it with the person I loved.
Right. So you get married, sweeps you off your feet, right?
Yeah.
And were you in that area, Tallahassee, or did you move to this area? Were you in Orlando?
Well, when we finished school, he came here to work, and I went home. I was from Miami, so I went home until we got married later that year, and then we settled in Orlando.
In Orlando.
Right.
And
he's been with the same office ever since.
Oh, wow. Such a loyal man.
He is. See?
So
yes.
You're here. You have three of your kids.
Right.
You're all in this area. And they all grow up. They all go to school, Olympia, right? So we covered some of that area.
Yeah.
But then the kids grow up, and we've always been sort of going back and forth. Is it easier when your kids are in the house and you're kind of managing them, or is it easier as a parent when they're out of the house?
Yeah.
And out of the house definitely has its challenges,
Absolutely.
doesn't it?
Absolutely.
You sort of take on this new role, and it's not always so easy.
Yeah, but we, of course, as our marriage grew, our faith grew, our love for the Lord grew. So by the time we had our children, we were followers of Jesus. I mean, all in, I feel like. Now, we, of course, continually mature as he sanctifies us and things like that. But so we were trying did raise them in a home that was very committed to Christ following. And that's hard when children think their own, think on their own, and you want them to grow their own faith, and you want them to grow in their own ways. But yeah, I don't know what is easier. Home was raising them when they were children, little ones, was just, it was a joy. I mean, we had our moments because they're so different. I mean, I don't know. When you have 3 children, are they, some I look at and go, gosh, you have just exactly the same child 3 times. But no, mine were all very, very different.
But, all of them have to sort of go through that moment that you went through, sort of that, I've got to recommit I got to make this my own, this relationship with Christ. And that's what you hope for, that your kids will sort of get to that point, that it will become their own relationship. You were obviously experiencing the same thing, and not all of them were sort of there with their faith. And so...
Yeah, and I don't even know if it was a faith-based issue. I think what I dealt with and what we as a family dealt with was just what was part of raising teenagers and raising children to become independent adults. Dependent on the Lord, of course, but I think for our family and for me, it was trying to help them be the best they could be in every way possible, yet letting them develop their own way of doing it. And that's very tricky when you don't see eye to eye on things. And
so you have a friction, or you have sort of a little separation between yourself and one of your children, and it becomes very difficult for you. Your relationship, as they get older and everything, and then you have sort of an eye-opening kind of experience about this separation. And what was that? Well,
one of our relationships just really became difficult, and it was a very dark time for me. And a very hard time for our family, but I knew God was doing something, and it just got very difficult. But what God was up to was fixing me, and I can't fix everybody. It's not my job to make people think like me, but it is,
especially our kids.
Right.
Yeah.
But we love our kids. There's just this love that God puts in our heart for each child that is so beautiful and so unique. And so there is this unique love for each one of them. And when there's a problem that creates a separation, it hurts both, But my problem was I kept looking at the other person and saying, well, if she would, it's her.
Change.
Yeah. If she would do this and she do that, and I had so much.
Then
I kept looking at myself,
better.
going, "Well, I did everything the way I did it." Daryl always says, "Steph, you're always right." It's like, of course I'm always right. No, but when you look at yourself, you think, "Well, I wouldn't have done it if it wasn't right."
Right.
But it wasn't right. My part, and that's where I like to focus, because I am not in charge of how other people think or what they're. I don't even know what you're thinking unless you're telling me.
That moment though, when you had that realization that this wasn't her issue, this was your issue.
Yes.
Was really freeing when you were describing it to me.
It was so hard though. I didn't even expect it. I was she was getting married, and we had not had a real strong relationship for years. And I went to meet her for her the night before the rehearsal dinner, and we wore the exact same shirt. And I went, wow, this is my daughter.
Yeah.
And we looked similar. I saw her and I saw so much of myself, but yet we were so distant, And in those next 48, 72 hours was the hardest, yet it was a beautiful time. She was getting married, but God was just tearing me down to my core. I can remember sitting at the rehearsal dinner, and I just had the menu in front of my face, and I was just sobbing because I didn't even know this young woman anymore. And all these people loved her, and I didn't feel like I even knew her anymore. And she was beautiful and is beautiful. And I was holding my other daughter's hand, and I don't know if she even realized what was going on, but I think she did, because she had walked it peripherally. And as the wedding went on, I just felt like the Lord was just stripping me of all of the she, and going, me, Stephanie, you need to change. You need to realize who you are and what I need from you. And this was God just ripping off scars that I had, held on to. And it was just very personally powerful. I have never experienced that. And it gradually started to heal. I mean, I just envisioned it as he took this scab and was just clawing away at it until it just was a bloody mess. Really, that's where I felt in moments. And then it was gradually healing. And then by the time her wedding came around, which, was now 48 hours later, there was a place of just, wow, this is my daughter. And she's beautiful. And God just allowed me to just love her in those moments. And I don't know what she was experiencing, again, because she was getting married. This was her day. And I was having this whole thing going on, in the middle of all of the outside.
Wow, and I think you even said that I think your son just noticed that you were different. You could just sort of tell that something had been lifted from you.
Well, God made perfect arrangements for unexpected timing of things to where I stayed an extra day. I took her to the airport to go on her honeymoon, her and her husband, and we had a moment when I got out of the car to send her to the airport, and I just held her face in my hands, and I don't know what she was thinking, but the Lord just allowed me to ask for her forgiveness.
Wow.
And just tell her how much I love her. And, for me, it was this journey of the last 72 hours was just a huge healing for me to be able to experience forgiveness and grace and love for my beautiful child,
Yeah. Well, that's, there's so many people that are sort of dealing with that, kids at different ages and dealing with it. And I think your story here is really saying that God's going to work on your heart, but it's going to start with you. If there's going to be forgiveness, there's going to be a restoration, it's going to begin with us first. And we're the ones that are going to have to heal. We're the ones that are going to have to forgive. And so that's...
And then you can move into other, and now I'll tell you, the relationship isn't like we're not best buddies. We don't talk every day, but it doesn't need to be that.
Right.
There's forgiveness.
It's a step. It's
right.
a step.
We already know that, and she's a unique person. She's going to do really unique, cool things, and so am I. They don't have to be and so it at least was a place of huge healing.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming and sharing that. And it's not easy.
No.
We get into those
Years.
sort of situations, but we appreciate that.
And as a matter of fact, in her room, I have a banner that says, "When it gets too hard to stand, kneel." And it just reminds me of the hours I spent kneeling and now the hours I stand praising,
Amen.
So
thank you.
Thanks for letting me share that.
Absolutely. Well, next up we have Janine Paskowitz. And Janine's been going to our church, relatively a newcomer, only the past 5 years or so. And so she has written a book, and the book is available on Amazon, and it's called Overshadowed. And there's the cover. You can search Overshadowed Janine and find that book on Amazon. And she has graciously gave me a copy, and I read through it. And I'm glad I had that opportunity to do so. Your story is not easy. And I guess maybe just a little warning, if anybody has got kids around, some of this may be a little difficult to hear some of the things, but it is a good story of restoration. And how God had really impressed on you to love and to forgive. So your husband was Gil.
Yes.
And your mom was Verna. Mm-hmm. You have a son, Chris.
Yes.
Okay. And a brother, Rick and David. We'll get into their stories. And so you start the book in 1989, really talking about your dad is dying, and he's dying from culmination of diabetes, and he's going blind during that time, to sort of set up what had happened and why this moment was so meaningful. So you grew up in Detroit. Is that
Yes.
where you were born?
Yes.
And so that was in, and I'll let you say the year. What year were you born?
1937.
1937.
Yes.
So we're talking World War II.
Yes.
Right, is going on in the background.
Right.
You weren't actively involved in World War II, but you were.
Knew
you
much
knew what
about
was
it,
Yes. Okay. And so your family life wasn't the best. There were a number of signs and things that were going on. And one of the first things you notice is at 5 years old, there's a lot of work that you're being asked to do that sort of seemed beyond what a 5-year-old will do. What were some of the things that your dad was telling you to do?
Well, I had to iron clothes, learned how to iron handkerchiefs, and then, gradually more, and had to wash floors.
Oh, wow.
And
And he
things-
made you redo it one time when it wasn't perfect, right?
You bet.
Right.
Sure did.
So we wish this was a Cinderella story, kind of like some of these things that you're doing at 5. Church-wise, your parents are dropping you off at church, is that right?
We walked.
You walked,
We
okay.
walked. The church was a block and a half, 2 blocks away. And my older brother, he was 11 months older than I, he and I were allowed to walk up there to church because we didn't have money for a car and we weren't going to church, but they felt we should be allowed to go. So we went there to Sunday school, but the congregation wouldn't accept children in the service
Okay.
unless they were accompanied by a parent, so then we'd come back home.
So you got sort of a connection with church, your understanding about God, your understanding about Jesus, the Bible, all these sort of things. But you're getting home, and it's a much more tumultuous situation there. We're talking very dysfunctional. You got your grandfather there, right? And now, is this your dad's?
We were living with them at the time.
Okay. And is this your dad's father?
Yes.
Okay. And so he's drinking pretty
Yes.
heavily.
Yes.
And there's a lot of friction between him and your dad.
Yes.
And one time there was in a lot of detail, talked about the fight that almost got very, very violent.
It was very violent, yes.
And that was that the norm, or was that?
That was pretty much the norm, except this time a gun appeared, a shotgun.
Yeah.
And we had moved next door. My grandfather owned 3 houses and sold one and then moved us into the one next door to them.
Okay.
And Grandma had passed. Now he's living full-time with us.
Okay.
And yes, it was very,
So your dad's very controlling through all
Very.
this, making you work. But then some other things are beginning to happen. You see that he's watching you while you're undressing, and then there are some spankings that are occurring.
I would say beatings.
Beatings, okay.
Beatings.
And there's times where he's sort of hurting you with hot water and burning you in
Yes.
that process.
Yes.
Okay. And then there's times where he's sort of slipping his hand where it shouldn't belong.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
and this was happening about what age? How early was this?
It started when I was about 5 the first time.
5.
And then there was a period where that didn't seem to be going on, but he became very mean after Grandma passed away. He grew to where he was just angry all the time.
Okay.
All the time. And so we were afraid to say anything or do anything. And if you looked at him the wrong way, you might get
Right.
it.
So you have the physical that you're worried about in terms of the anger issue, but there's also the sexual that's
Yes.
happening at the same time.
Yes.
So you got the extreme hate, and then he's like showing his love in a very dysfunctional way.
Yeah.
So you're pleading with God during this time, right?
I was.
What are you saying to God?
I was pleading with God to take my dad or take me, because I had tried suicide and it didn't work. I got up feeling great the
You
next
took a bottle
morning.
of aspirin, you said.
Pardon me?
It was aspirin that you took?
It was called Emprum Compound at the
Okay.
time. I don't even know if you can get it anymore, but I
No.
took the whole bottle.
It didn't work.
Didn't work. It didn't work. But yes, I did try suicide several times.
Okay. You also consider killing him,
I did.
and that was 2 times,
2 times, yes.
and it was once with a knife,
Yes, butcher knife.
butcher knife.
I snuck it to the cot that I slept on because my dad would always come to me. And I hid it under the covers at my stomach, and I would practice that night how I was going to bring it up.
Wow.
And when he would come down, he would get it in his stomach. But then I thought, but what if that doesn't work? Then I was going to be in just tremendous trouble.
Right.
So I hid it under the cot, so he never saw it. But there was a time when he was beating my brother, and I knew it was going to happen because I could see it coming early in the day because he was going to be found out.
Yeah.
So I took the baseball bat and hid it real close to where I slept. And when it started, it came from the kitchen into the room where I was, and I stood on top of that cot, and I went to grab that baseball bat, and I could see my brother's face getting redder and redder, and I was so terrified. I just wanted to hit my dad over the
Yeah.
head to stop it. But I thought, what if? And
Yeah.
it was like, the Lord's just fighting with me, don't do it, and I didn't. I didn't, obviously.
Well, you know, the other thing that's very odd about this whole story is your dad is a deacon and a Bible study leader with the college.
A college and career class.
College
yes.
and career path.
Yes.
So there's this monster at home, but to everybody else,
He was wonderful. This was Stephen the Joker, the guy that was so great, good Christian, and had a real sense of humor, and put on this face that he was the greatest.
so your family, obviously everybody knows to some extent of what's going on. Did your mom understand sexually what was happening to you?
I told her on a Wednesday night, a lot of times she would take the 2 buses to get to church on a Wednesday night, but my dad was too tired to go. The one terrible memory is of me standing ironing. I would have been probably about 14, 15, and I had schoolwork to do plus this ironing I had to do. So I was ironing, and my dad had been so-called napping, and he, rightfully so, he got up at 4:30 in the morning to go to work. So that's understandable. But he came in the kitchen and he said, "Come on with me." And I said, "No, Dad, I've got to iron and I have schoolwork to do." I knew what he was asking. And I refused. And he just yanked the cord from out of the light switch, old home, right? And said, "You're coming." And he grabbed me and he pulled me into the bedroom. That was disaster, of course. But
So you're experiencing some stomach pains and things like that. They really,
a lot.
they're trying to figure out what it is, but it ends up just being the stress that you're under
Yeah.
inside. You're holding this all in.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem that anyone's helping you. I don't know what things were like. I mean, today it's much different. It seems that today, if someone said
yeah.
anything, there would be all sorts of
Yes.
authorities there.
Yeah.
But back then, did people just kind of keep these things?
They did. They kept
Under the
them
rug?
quiet. There was no such thing. Even years later, when I tried to tell this minister who had was part of the family, he was a family friend and had sent us to camp. And that was the 1 week I had of reprieve when
Right.
we went to camp. But he didn't want to hear it. And my mother went to the pastor of the church and tried to tell him what was going on. And he just kind of sloughed it off, turned away. And I found out many years later that he was all part of the same thing himself.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Wow.
So that was really a hard pill
Yeah.
to swallow. But yeah, I confronted my dad, of course, when I was in the hospital that time. And I told my mother, she said, I'll carry this to my grave. And when my dad got in from work, she didn't carry it too far. She told him what I had said, the doctors had told me. And they couldn't do anything for me unless the stress was taken off from the home. And my dad said he'd never talk to me again as long as he lived. And I thought, well, that would be wonderful, except that I wish he wouldn't touch me as long.
Right.
And that didn't last very long.
So all of this, this hurt and everything, obviously in your family, your one brother, David, eventually killed himself.
He killed himself.
28, I believe it was.
Yes.
And took a lot of blame for what is happening. I mean, I guess you all in some way wanted to protect each other and help each other, but you just couldn't do that.
No.
But you had an experience of forgiveness as a child. You went to a
Youth camp.
youth camp, and that's where you really sort of understood
Yes.
really what you needed to do, and that was forgive.
Yes. When I was very young, I was going to camp, and I had a Bible, just an old Bible, and I would hide under the covers. And I had a penlight flashlight that my brother had bought when he went to camp and gave me. And I would read the scriptures under the covers. And the one was, bring up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he'll not depart from it. And I'm pleading with the Lord, that scripture is right there. And when I get married, I want a man that won't depart from those scriptures. And I want a man that won't touch my children and that will bring them up in your ways. And I was only 10 at the time, but I kept praying that prayer. All through the years, I prayed that prayer that God would see what's going on. I just knew. I would tell him, I'd curl up on my cot and I'd say, God, you're my father. You're my father. You see what's going on. And only you can change this. And so through the years, as I kept praying that prayer, and that last year I got to go to youth conference, I had grown hard because nothing changed. I couldn't see any change coming. And that hate was so strong in my heart. And the third night of youth camp, it was just like this man of God knew what was in my heart and all that hate.
Really?
And he was preaching from the word of God, saying about vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will repay. And I thought, oh, that's me. I'm holding it. I'm holding it. And they opened the altars and they said, if you need forgiveness, come down and God will make a new person out of you. Wow. And my, did he ever. The burden was gone. That heavy load I carried was instantly gone. And I could just do nothing but praise God.
Wow. It's interesting with the two stories we talked about today, just holding that inside and finally just, realizing in so many ways, we're always waiting for the other person to say they're sorry before we forgive.
It's not going to work.
But you weren't gonna get that, at least you didn't think, not at that age.
No.
You were gonna get that from your dad.
No.
But you did later. And so that's why you opened on his deathbed, so to speak, in 89.
Yeah.
That when you went to see him, what did he say to you?
Yes. I was in his home maybe 5 minutes, and he invited me to come and sit on the couch with him. It scared me, but my husband was so sure that this was the right time to go. And it was during the trucker strike. I'll never forget. It was not an easy trip there with them shooting, them. And I went and sat down. Now, mind you, my daughter was with me, knew nothing of a lot of this.
Right.
She knew we didn't visit. She only knew that my father was hateful.
Right.
So when I'm there, she's panicking when she sees my father with his finger beckoning me to come and sit beside him.
Yeah.
But I did because I was sure that this was of the Lord. And as I sat next to him, my stepmom had gone back in the kitchen to finish dinner. And he leaned over against me and said, sis, he always called me sis, will you forgive me? And I looked at him and I said, for what, Dad? I didn't want all kinds of things to come up, but I knew that he knew what I'm speaking of.
Right.
And he said, you know, all those awful things I did to you when you were at home.
Wow.
And I said, Dad, you were forgiven many years ago. And he said, how could you? And I said, how could I not? I wanted my prayers answered.
Yeah.
And the Bible tells us that if we forgive, he will hear us. And I said, you know, when Jesus died, he died to forgive us.
Yeah.
And if I want him to forgive me of all my sins,
You got to be a forgiving person.
I got to be forgiving. Yeah, yeah, you have to.
Well, that's, just about the extreme that you can think is, besides someone murdering a child, and forgiving that person or a loved one, but, the abuse that you went through so many years ongoing to get to that point of forgiveness, it makes me evaluate, well, what are the things in my life that I'm holding on to, that I'm not forgiving them for, whatever it may be. And we have to be forgiving people, and it's good for us, right? It's good for our relationship with God. It's good for our relationship with other people. So we appreciate you telling that story. Wow, it's powerful. So if people want to get a lot of details, a lot of interesting facts about growing up in Detroit during those days and what it was like and getting your first phone, all sorts of things in there. It's a really good, it's a wonderful read. And, I think the other thing also just to say is, if you're dealing with anything like this and you're watching this today, there's a lot of places you can go for help. And so contact one of those places. Just go on and, talk to someone, talk to a pastor, a youth group leader or someone, and you will get help, and you will get help right away. It won't have to linger as long as it did with Janine.
No.
So we appreciate everyone's stories. If you have a story also, in fact, we got Janine's story because she was watching one of these before and sent her book in. Share your story with us, and we would love to know. There's the address that you can send your story. Let us know something that's been going on in your life, how God has really healed you, redeemed you, saved you, and we want to make sure that other people know about it. Thanks for being here. Join us Friday, and we're going to have worship and another look at the book of Psalms. Thanks for being here. Go be the church.
I want.